Every generation kind of assesses that kids these days are different than when I was a child. It was totally different. And that's, I think it is true. It definitely changes over time. But is it changing for the better? Well, my next guest has written a deeply researched book on the subject. It comes out in March, but I couldn't wait for that. I wanted to talk to him about it now. The name of the book is Family Unfriendly. Tim Carney, the author, joins us on the phone. Hello, Tim. Good to have you with us, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tim, you're on Twitter at TP Carney, and you started putting out a thread on this subject. But give me a sense of what kind of research you undertook for the book and what you meant to do with this. What did you set out to do here?
So the first research I did was getting married and having 6 children. So
Yeah.
and realizing that makes us weird. I guess I'm a young Gen Xer, and the millennials are the most numerous generation, and they really, the birth rate dropped though once they became of childbearing age. Right when we should have been having a mini baby boom,
Yes.
we had a baby bust, and that has sort of bothered me for a decade since Jonathan Last wrote What to Expect When No One's Expecting. I've been wondering when would this reverse itself. We had the recession, and then we had the best economy ever right before COVID, and birth rates were much lower than they
Yes.
had been during the recession, and they were falling.
Is
And
it
we're
is
setting
that?
record.
I'm sorry. I just wonder, is that, in your view, is that cultural, chemical, or some combination of both? I mean, what?
It's cultural. I mean, that really, the fact that every explanation you see says, well, young people can't afford it, housing prices, and housing prices is not a non-factor, but, student loans or whatever. Most of those explanations fell apart as I looked into the economics of it, except for housing prices. But that was inadequate to explain what had happened. It's a contributor. And I really think the cultural issues are the problem here. First, that parenting culture is all crazy. Like, parents are expected to put their kids in travel teams and to helicopter them and to make sure, and forget about while women are pregnant, they're not supposed to have like deli meat or a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. So you have that whole cultural aspect of it. B, when I went to places like Israel or Mormon parts of Utah, I saw what a real family-friendly culture could look like, where people just make the decision. The culture has made the decision. No, getting married and having kids is a normal part of adulthood. You don't have to do it, but we are going to kind of structure society around that being a normal thing to do. And finally, I think we've got values that don't align with family, that we're hyper individualistic, we're over materialistic, and in all these ways, I think our culture is family unfriendly, and that's the argument of the book.
So in that case, you see kids as an impediment to your materialism. They're getting in the way of you enjoying your life and your convenience.
Yeah, and I don't even want to put it in terms of just selfishness as much as we think it's good to just focus entirely on your career. And we think that anything that distracts from that is somehow us not rising to our potential. And especially for women, they think it's like betraying your sex if you take time off of your job to raise kids.
Do you feel like
so,
women feel that much pressure against prioritizing their children that you saw it all over the place?
Oh yeah, I definitely talked to women all over, and even internationally in London. This one woman was like, "You know what I want to do? I want to get married and have 6 kids." But that's really, she said, she's a Britishism. She said it's shamed upon if my sort of life ambitions are not career ambitions. And so the sociology research I did on this, a lot of it was really eye-opening, but sometimes you read the introduction to these things, and then you read the findings, and you start banging your head against the wall. There's this one paper that I cite in the book that said women are learning that being a working mother is much harder than they thought. But what the data really showed was that women, when they're 18, millennials, when they were 18, said they really, really care about career. Those who really, really cared about career and had one child, later were asked, they said, well, actually, family's more important than career. So that idea that some women decided, oh, wait a second, I'm actually called to be a mother. The researchers couldn't handle that. They said, oh, well, somehow these women must have just given up on the idea of career. So anything that's pro-family gets cast as a negative thing, as lowering your ambitions. And
Yes.
so the kind of feminism that I fit in this book is saying, well, dads have to be more daddish. Dad have to be more dadly, I guess would be the word I would use. That we have to, in the workplace, stand up and at 5 o'clock say, oh, by the way, I got to go home. My family needs me. We have to, as bosses, tell all our employees, male and female, you know what, this job is really great. Your family's more important. That's the sort of feminism we need. Instead, the feminism we've gotten is people saying, you, woman, can be a company man. Mm-hmm. And that's part of our family unfriendly culture.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you mentioned earlier that one of the things that's happening with parenting that's changed now is what the phenomenon we refer to as helicopter parenting, that parents are involved in every facet of their child's life, and whether the extracurricular, the regular curricular, and that's changed a lot since you were a kid. Gen X, we talk a lot about latchkey kids, like kids that came and went from home and were kind of able to handle things on their own from a very young age. How has that changed, and how has that been an impediment to good family building?
Oh, there's tons of data on this. Let me put it this way. Dads, and again, this first part I think is good. Dads spend about 50% more time with their kids than dads did 50 years ago. Women spend more than twice as much time in the workplace than women did 50 years ago. Mothers still spend almost twice as much time taking care of their kids as mothers did 20 years ago. So we've somehow decided that we need to double the amount of total parenting time that's going on with kids, that we need to, and so some of this is just sort of bad expectations where parents think they need to ride their kids to demand the best outcomes.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, riding your kids does not get the best outcomes. But then I also point to how society is built in a way, once you sort of start to chip away at childhood independence, it becomes this vicious circle, this downward spiral, and it gets worse. And so, like, we rode our bikes to the Little League game, and mom and dad came if it was like a nice night out or if their friends were going to be there. Nowadays, kids, our communities aren't as walkable. I know it's not every conservative who talks about walkability, but when you're a parent, if your kid can ride their bike or walk to their Little League game, their friend's house, the local basketball court, that makes everybody in the family much happier. So that becomes harder. And then the spiral, the vicious circle continues. The good baseball players are pulled out of the Little League and they all go into travel ball. And then you show up to a Little League game and there's nobody who can throw a strike, and the whole league, it's boring and the league falls apart. And so then there's not even the option of the local rec league. And so there's tons of data about how parents are either choosing to or forced to, and it's a mixture of both, spend much more time. They're much more anxious, and that anxiety then trickles down to their children, and the kids don't end up happier.
Also, they don't let their kids out of their sight, do they?
No, and that's the other thing is to just sometimes, before I had a bunch of kids, when we had just one or two kids, I would occasionally get scolded for taking my eyes off. My 5-year-old is on a jungle gym in a playground and not in like Newark or Fallujah, but in suburban Washington, D.C.
Right.
And, get a tisk for losing track of my child. I'm supposed to know where they are at every moment. And then as I got older and more confident, I started doing the opposite. Not tisking, but just sort of encouraging people. Hey, you know what? The kids are going to be fine. They just let's let them go. And so parents would meet my kids at the playground and then email me and say, you know what? I realize that if your kids can be unattended at the playground, mine can too, especially if there's a bunch of other kids there.
It does seem like there are more threats on the cell phones than there are at the playgrounds.
Well, and I do think that tech, that is the place where we need to worry about. That what's online is an inhuman environment. We spend all this time fearing the human, fearing the alive. So what was COVID all about? Stay away from people. We instantly adopted that because I think the fearing of biology has somehow been worked into our culture. But really what we have to fear is the inhuman, the apps that are built to sort of put us in this unreal circumstance, whether it's just TikTok. The way I put in the book is you spend decades building a culture for your family, for your kids to live in. And within a month or two of just browsing on TikTok, they are taught a totally different worldview, one that's built around the individual, one that's not built around community, one that's not built around tradition or family or anything like that. And so these are the cultural things that we do need to worry about is coming from the apps. Sorry, go on.
No, I just on this point, I was talking to some friends this weekend. They also have young kids. We have 9-year-olds, fourth graders. And that conversation comes up. It's like, what does the future look like with the cell phones, the devices? And my view is that not only am I going to prolong that, like stretch that out, delay it as long as possible, but also I figure what it's going to allow is my daughter will have the opportunity to see the other kids around her, and how they change when they get the phones. And I want that to be instructive for her. This is my plan. I don't know if it's going to work, but I want her to look around and to say, okay, look how much Susie changed after she got her phone and what started happening. And this is what we're on guard for.
Well, and this is why I talk about culture, because I don't want to say that this is all about individual parenting decisions, because my wife and I are really aided in being low tech for our kids.
Yeah.
The support we get is from schools, private schools that don't allow the phones.
Right.
If you see a phone, if a teacher sees a phone, they take it away. And so then that trickles out. And so there's more parents who are like, you know what, you don't need a phone until you're driving. You don't need a smartphone until you go off and buy one in college. And so in that way, we are not, we're not worried about our kids saying, hey, all my friends have it, because we know that's not true. So we get support from our community. And that's one of the key things that I do here. Again, I push back on individualism, but I always joke, a wise woman said it takes a village to raise a child. Parents need community support.
Yes.
Now, whatever she meant by that, you know what I mean. Parents need community support in raising kids. And one of the things is a culture that's anti-smartphone for young kids.
So if I can take this full circle, you mentioned that the birth rates have plummeted, so especially millennials having very few kids. And my view is that the end result of this is that if small families mean low trust communities. So if you have a small family, and especially if you live in like the Washington D.C. area where everybody's transient, you don't really know your neighbors by and large, unless you've been here for a long time. You don't know who your neighbors are. This is why parents kind of freak out about letting their kids out. Like, oh, the kid's going to ride a bike through the neighborhood, go to the local playground by themselves. You're not going to see them. The problem in that environment, in this environment, is we have low trust communities. We don't know these people. These are all strangers. Whereas if you have big families in well-developed communities and busy churches and busy civic organizations, a busy local pool, you start to actually get to know everybody. Then you're not so worried about your kid being on the run, because no matter where they are, there's probably some neighbor nearby who knows them they can go to if necessary.
Yep, and so we seek government to help us where, individual parents are not enough. And this is what Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about 200 years ago, right? He said that that what's going to happen in America is that we're going to become a bunch of atomized individuals who seek protection from the large state to fill in the gap of what civil society should be doing.
Yes.
Civil society, the neighbors should be, I talk to people, and there are a lot of communities where this still happens. And some of them are some high-income communities, but for the most part, they're, religiously conservative communities, whether it's the Dutch Reform or the Mormons or the Orthodox Jewish. And there they say, like, the neighbors are raising my kids. The older neighbor siblings are the ones who are teaching my kids how to throw a football, etc. And that is, we almost forget that the community can do that. And we think, okay, there's only so much my wife and I can do. The rest, we need the government to come in. That's certainly the way every Washington Post parenting columnist writes it. And what I try to do with Family Unfriendly is push back and say, no, it's about the culture. It's about the culture in a dozen ways, but it's certainly not just about individual parenting choices, and it's not just about economics, and it's not really, we shouldn't be asking the government to help us. That said, government policy matters, right? Like, when I lived in Wheaton, Maryland, they kept making the roads wider and wider and wider, and made it just less possible for our kids to even walk to the corner store. And government policy matters, and we have tax law that, the whole Social Security system is proven to drive down birth rates, but they don't give any sort of accommodations to larger families in Social Security. So government does play a role, but we certainly don't need, massive government-run daycares or $10,000 child tax credit. That won't help.
The book is Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. The author, Tim Carney. And Tim, can people pre-order the book now?
Yeah, it's already available for pre-order on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
All right. Family Unfriendly. The book comes out in March, which means I'll be talking a lot more to Tim about this subject. It's one of the most important in the whole country right now. Thank you very much, Tim. Good to talk to you, sir.